were you always a batsman, or as a youngster did you try all elements?
Batting was number one on my agenda. That was the most popular thing for me, and I wanted to bat all the time. We grew up in very sort of humble environments where it was difficult for you to access sporting equipment. So there were times when, as a young player, you would think about giving up the game. I can tell you, I mean, I'm getting goose pimples here because I'm going through that emotional journey that I went through back then. Mr. Nelson Mandela, who I had the chance of speaking with on my 20th birthday, he called me. How you prepare mentally will guarantee, I would say, 70 to 80% of the success that you will achieve as a batsman or as a cricketer. 2006 was one of my best years as an international player because, again, I had a solid first-class season. I won the Sir Vivian Richards Award, scoring the most runs, and having the chance to play and walk straight into a series again helped me. And my heart was broken because after doing so well in 2006, they picked a group of 30 players for the 2007 World Cup, and I was not even included.
In terms of, if we focus on the media side, is there any one innovation that you feel that could aid the development, aid the learning of the viewer?
Listening at a break to what a coach or a player is telling players, or how the two players who are batting are conversing and sharing information. We all want to know what is going through a player's mind at a crucial and critical moment in a game. If we can get it real time, wow.
Cricket Love Stories with me, Neel Khagram. Today we're joined by Daren Ganga. Daren, how's things going?
Yeah, good so far. Adjusting to a new normal in the cricket environment and to life, as a matter of fact. It's something that we have no control of. What we can control is the manner in which we live, how we protect ourselves and those around us. So it requires a lot more discipline. And I think this little phase has allowed me to reflect on the importance of my loved ones and the importance of living a healthy lifestyle as well, and focusing on your mental health and wellness. So I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've looked at it from a positive point of view, and I think I've gained a lot from this experience.
And cricket's on as well, which is always a bonus. So let's take it all the way back with yourself. You were born in Trinidad. Was it Barrackpore?
Correct, Barrackpore, and it's synonymous a place in India, in West Bengal. Obviously, if you study Caribbean history, you would realize that Trinidad and Tobago as a country has deep ties with India, and a lot of my ancestors, they came from India during the indentureship period back in the 1845 to maybe close to 1890 period. So that is how my great-grandparents came to settle in Trinidad and how we came about. So very diverse population, and yeah, proud to be from that small rural agricultural community called Barrackpore in South Trinidad.
What first got you into cricket? What first attracted you to it? What was your earliest memories?
Well, it's a bit of my heritage. Obviously, my family supported cricket. They played cricket. The focal point in my community of Barrackpore was our cricket team, which was a team comprising of my uncles and my dad, and eventually my older brother. He was a major part of that team. So there was a natural sort of inclination for me to be involved in the game, because I started off, you'll take water, you'll take lunch, you'll take tea for the senior guys who are playing. And then that eventually moved to us playing in the under-19 team, and then eventually alongside my uncles and my dad. So it was a natural transition for me in that community environment. As a youngster growing up, you wanted to be one of those players on that team because everyone in the community came out to look at cricket. So that was a natural pull. Apart from that, cricket is quite developed and expansive at the primary school level. So I played for my school primary team. I then played for my school secondary secondary school team as well. And that's how the entire passion grew in the game, to be quite honest. And I started my career in that environment.
Were you always a batsman, or as a youngster, did you try all elements, spin, fast bowling? Or was it always batsmanship for you?
Well, batting was number one on my agenda. That was the most popular thing for me, and I wanted to bat all the time. But at the same time, I recognized that growing up in a community where you hardly had persons who wanted to bowl, you had no choice but to bowl to earn your right to bat. So that pushed me to bowling. I used to bowl medium pace, and then that changed into me bowling off break. Tried my hand at wicket keeping as well, but that was just temporarily. But yeah, you can say that batting was my main focus, and that is where I concentrated most of my efforts.
Was there any standout innings that you played as a youngster, I'm talking in terms of your school cricket, that stood out? And when did Trinidad first spot your talents? How did you get into the system? Can you talk us through what it's like, the system back home?
Well, it was a sort of consolidation of two sort of efforts that I was making at the same time. One was at the primary school level, and playing at the primary school level also allowed me the opportunity to play for our community team alongside my dad and my uncles. So during the week, I'll be playing for my primary school team, and I'll be doing well. And there was this one innings that I played against Inverness Presbyterian School. I scored my first century as a cricketer. And you know, that was a moment I remember my schoolmates and they're lifting me off the ground. I did get a soft drink from my principal, and back in the day, that was a great accomplishment, not only to score a century, but to get the accolades that I received on that day. So that happened very early in my life. I think I was 10 years old. And I also, at the same time, 10, 11, 12, started to play alongside the men in my community. And by the age of 12, 13, I was scoring centuries for that team, albeit not a first-class team, but it was more a private league that was happening in sort of communities where you had 8 or 10 teams playing against each other. And I started to dominate there as well. So you'd often see in our newspaper little clips with me about this 10, 12-year-old scoring 150 or 120 in a 30-over game in Barrackpore. And that is where the world and Trinidad and Tobago started to know about my talent and my ability as a batsman.
Did you suffer any setbacks as a youngster in terms of cricketing wise? And again, do you have any, if you did you have any tips for youngsters perhaps watching this who are trying to make it to the highest level, get into that academy system, wherever they may be living, and they just can't get through it, they suffer hurdles? Any advice you can give for them?
Sure. I think, me growing up in the late 1970s into the 1980s, resources weren't readily available. So we grew up in very sort of humble environments where it was difficult for you to access sporting equipment. So there were times when, as a young player, you would think about giving up the game because you looked around and you realized that you didn't have the resources that you needed to play this sport of cricket. It's not a cheap sport, it's an expensive sport, especially if you're a batsman. To afford a bat was a big thing. I only got my first bat when I was 17, just on the cusp of playing first class cricket for Trinidad and Tobago. So thankfully for the club team in my community of Barrackpore, I was able to borrow the equipment from the club and use that to play. So you will have challenges, one with regard to equipment and access to resources. The other challenge that we faced was access to good facilities. If rain fell, you had no chance of getting a knock or playing cricket because the outfield was wet. Back then we used to play on sand pitches, so you needed like this matting covering to play on these pitches. So those were things which were hindrances, if you look back and reflect in that time, that prevented you from really dedicating more time towards the game and pushing your development as a player. Also, I struggled to get access to persons who would have played at the highest levels or even played at the first class level. I didn't get the chance to rub shoulders with any first class player or any test match player or any international player when until about the age of 17, 80s when I started to play alongside Lara and Simmons and Bishop and these guys in the Trinidad and Tobago setup. So I basically learned my game by trial and error. There were community coaches, my uncles, and they followed the game. We followed the game internationally. So a lot of what you learned was from looking at cricket, listening to persons in your community, and you're pretty much shaped by that. So my advice to young cricketers is, you know, there will be hindrances and setbacks in you being the best that you can be from a very young age. But I think what you got to try and lean on is your passion for the game. You must have a deep passion for wanting to play this game. First and foremost, I would say, for your own personal enjoyment and for your own fulfillment. Sometimes, and many times, we have players coming through the ranks who have misplaced priorities, who think about just playing the game for maybe some sort of material return or some sort of intrinsic reward. I'm saying if you can develop a deep passion for this game from a very tender age, it gives you more of an advantage, because as you go further, that pathway of development, you would find that the obstacles will continue to come. And sometimes it's more about what's within and that deep desire that will drive you to become better. So that is my first advice. My second advice is to seek advice from persons. Now we live in an information age where access is quite easy. You can access international players via social media platforms. Now cricket is played prevalently across the globe. You can see it on television. You can go on the internet. You can watch on YouTube. So you have so many avenues where you can look at the best players in the world and see what they do. And you can pattern yourself by that. So we never had that. I mean, we grew up in an era where we still had black and white television. The internet wasn't something that was readily available. That only came later on. So make use of that. You know, be a student of the game. Ensure that you have fun playing the game. That's very important. Have fun playing the game and let your personality transfer into your cricket. Today, cricket and cricket coaching is not instructional. It is very much outcome based. So I would say, if you're a youngster, you're looking, think when you're batting, think about scoring runs. Don't complicate yourself. Focus on run scoring, how you score fours, how you score sixes, how you're going to get a single off a good ball. If you're a bowler, think about taking wickets. How are you going to take wickets? Take and keep it very simple. And if you're fielding, which is a dimension of the game that is equally important, think about catches and run out. So I would say simplicity is the best in terms of that approach for a young player now.
And then age 18, you make your debut for Trinidad and Tobago. Again, how did that make you feel at that moment? And you mentioned the players that you played with, the likes of Lara, Bishop, Simmons. How important, in your opinion, were those senior players in your development as an 18-year-old?
Well, I mean, before getting to that stage of making my first class debut, and I did that against Guyana at the Queen's Park Oval in Port of Spain, I did have the grooming through the youth levels, which gave me more of an opportunity to prepare myself for that eventual outcome of playing and making my first class debut. So I captained Trinidad under 13. I went on a tour to Grenada, and I was very prolific in terms of my run scoring ability. I captained Trinidad and Tobago under 16 team that toured England. We had this very good relationship with the West of England schools. So every other year they will tour the Caribbean, and then we would tour England as well. So I got a chance to rub shoulders with a lot of English cricketers at the same level that I was at and play in foreign conditions. So my game was developing all the time. But getting to that debut, it was really a recognition of my talent. And it was for me to start thinking about the challenges that first class cricket would have brought, and eventually West Indies cricket. I was so grateful that before making that first class debut, Brian Lara had just broken the record for the first time for the highest individual score in Test match cricket. And he was ultimately the most popular cricketer in Trinidad and Tobago. And for me, as a 16-year-old coming back from being captain of Trinidad and Tobago team, whilst on that said tour in England, we had a chance to go and see the West Indies play in England. and meet some of the players who were from Trinidad and all the other teams. There was a little bit of history there with myself and Brian because he met me and he met my team while on tour in 1995. So when I came back from that tour, I was called straight into trials with the big boys, so to speak. So the likes of Ian Bishop, Brian Lara, Phil Simmons, Rajendra Danraj, who was also on that West Indies team. And then you had the fast bowling stock, young fast bowlers coming through like the likes of Mervyn Dillon. You had Marlon Black, you had Nigel Francis. So you had a group of guys who were now coming through, who had tasted international cricket, and that was a place you wanted to be as a young cricketer. So in getting into the trials, I had a chance to get up close and personal for the first time with some of my childhood heroes. I would have looked at Brian scored that record in Antigua right here, and you know, just be in amazement with his skill level, his ability to score runs, you know, everything about him as a batsman, his flair, his style, his precision. Those are things that you admire because you play the game and you realize it's not easy for you to have that heightened level of skill. So that was a glory moment for me. I actually had my school principal and part of my school body be there at the Queen's Park Oval to hand me my official Trinidad and Tobago cap. I still have a picture of that in my home. That brings back a lot of fun memories for me. And yeah, my debut wasn't the best. I think I scored about 20 or 17 and 20 odd against Guyana. But that season, I got my first half century. I only played 3 games, but it really gave me a strong foundation for me in the next season, which was a defining season for me.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the following year, 2 standout innings, would it be? That 68 against Jamaica, and then the big 138 against Barbados, where you saw your side home winning by 1 wicket. What clicked for you that year?
Well, before you're making my pause raise, before I tell you about that 60, is it 68 against Jamaica's Chedwin Park?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, after playing playing those 3 or 4 matches in that first season, Brian was obviously very interested in my development. So he would, you know, be open to sharing the way he went about planning his innings, the way he approached situations, you know, give his philosophy about the game of cricket and share that. And with the hope of that helping and aiding my development and fast tracking my development. When he joined for that second first class season, I was still very young. Majority of the cricket that I played was cricket out of college and out of these youth tours that I went on. And he mentioned to me that, listen, at the end of the year, the West Indies has a tour to South Africa, a full tour. And he said, you know, this will be the first time that the West Indies is touring South Africa post-apartheid. And we are looking at the transition of some of the senior players. So there will be room for some young players to be blooded on that tour and to be given the opportunity to play at the highest level for the West Indies. And I was like, wow, you know, that sounds really good. And he said, Daren, I'm looking at you based on what I've seen in terms of you at the trials when you scored runs, your organization as a player. You can definitely, you know, make that jump from the first class level to the international level, but it must come with runs. So I'm telling you now, and this was the day before we played against Jamaica in Chedwin Park. So that's an attack with Courtney Walsh, Franklin Rose, a real powerful attack. Say if you score 100 against Jamaica in this game, I will vouch for you and I will try to get you on that tour because I think you're one of the best young players in the Caribbean. And Michael Atherton, in that 1994 side, I played against England, I scored 40 odd, and he said I was the best young player in the Caribbean that he had seen. So with that endorsement as well, the Caribbean was already aware that there is a young talent that will possibly make the jump from the youth level. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I went into that game opening the batting. I came to lunch on about 60 odd, not out. And I walked into the dressing room and Brian's eyes were like, youngster, you're going to put me in trouble today. I mean, what do you mean? I said, what do you mean? You told me that if I score a century, there's a strong chance of me making this trip to South Africa. I'm well on my way. So anyway, I go out after lunch. Jimmy Adams comes on to bowl. Ron Kanhai is the coach of this Jamaican first class team. He bowls me a short of a length delivery. I come back on my back foot. I pull it for 4. The ball goes for 4. And for some strange reason, I lost my balance. And I fall into my wicket. I'm out hit wicket on that said score. I was so gutted. I was so disappointed. I was distraught, actually, because I felt I had a real opportunity there. And I never really spoke to Brian about it. Lo and behold, that same game against Barbados that you talk about, that was my first class 100 in Trinidad. We were pulling up for the game. And this was the last game of the season. And Brian was supposed to play that game. So we're in the car park at the ground. And then he turned to me and he said, Daren, you know, my offer to you still holds. I'm actually not playing this game because I have to go to Barbados to select this West Indies team to go to South Africa. But my offer holds. And the rest is history. I got 138 and I got that chance eventually to tour South Africa with the West Indies.
When you're hearing all this, did any part of you feel the pressure, thinking what might be?
I can tell you, I mean, I'm getting goose pimples here because I'm going through that emotional journey that I went through back then, knowing how those little instances have shaped who I am today. It's frightening, but at the same time, it's very fulfilling. Looking back and reflecting on those crucial moments where it was a matter of one innings that shaped your destiny and gave you an opportunity to go forward. So that's a strong message for young players, whether you're a bowler or you're a batsman. Every single innings, make sure and you give it the appropriate amount of value, because you just never know who's watching. You just never know how that is going to be promoted, how that is going to be publicized. That might be the difference in you getting an opportunity over another person. So that's why I say this game is such a sacred game, and you don't have to become a first-class player or a test cricketer then to appreciate the value of what you do. So even if you're a youngster growing up and you're honing your skills, cherish the opportunity that you have to play the game and always give your best every time you play.
And then eventually, when you got the full test cap, so was it the 3rd test match in Durban? Do you remember who presented you with that baggy maroon cap?
Of course. I mean, Sir Clive Lloyd. He was the guy who gave me that test cap, and he was our manager of that tour. And he knew that I was the teenager and the only teenager in that tour with the veterans and some of the legendary West Indian players. We also had the great Malcolm Marshall, who was the coach on that tour, and someone that I got the opportunity to spend a great amount of time with. And he was one that was very supportive of me as a young player. He was always willing to share his advice. He would come in the nets and personally bowl to me during that tour. And even just aside, even back then, he used to complain about getting what he considered was acid reflux, only to find out in a year's time it was the effects of the cancer that he had. So it was really a sad and low moment for me as a young player when he passed away and when he was diagnosed with cancer. So you go through this career and you meet and play alongside and become friends with so many persons who you value, you cherish, who have contributed immensely towards your development. And I don't think there's sufficient thanks and appreciation you can give to all these guys. So that was a proud moment for me, touring South Africa, being the youngest player of that team. We had a little bit of an issue with our board before that tour. It also opened me up to the late great president of South Africa, Mr. Nelson Mandela, who I had the chance of speaking with on my 20th birthday. He called me in my 2nd test of that tour to wish me happy birthday, and I was just like overawed, blown over that this great man would call me, a 20-year-old touring with the West Indies, touring South Africa for the first time, and to wish me all the best, and to also indicate the importance of the role that I play as a young player from the West Indies, a young test player now, and the role that I have to play even beyond the playing field. And that is the person, that inspired me to launch my foundation, which is a charity foundation, that provides a sanctuary for the development of young persons across the board as well.
And on the playing field, your debut, you batted at number 6. How would you sum up those initial test matches? Because I know in the 5th test match of that series, you opened the batting. Sean Pollock had nipped you out a few times.
Six times.
As a youngster going through that process, obviously making your way in the game, your initial first few test matches, how do you reflect back when you think back, the emotions you were feeling at the highest level?
Neel, to be honest, I didn't think that I was mature enough as a player to handle the pressures of Test cricket as a batsman and against a formidable side as South Africa in foreign conditions. And I want to repeat, in foreign conditions, because that was significant for me. And I think it's a lesson for everyone, and more so those in positions to select young players and to make the decisions around the development and maybe the introduction of young talent at the international level. When, as a young player, you've played majority of your career in familiar conditions, it's very hard for you to adjust straight away to foreign conditions and to be successful. And that is what I struggled with. I struggled with the fact that we're playing in South Africa. You think of Durban, which at that time was a juicy square where seam bowlers had a field day bowling there. And at that time, they had a formidable seam bowling unit led by Alan Donald, who was in the prime of his career. Sean Pollock was now coming up. Jack Callis was bowling 140 consistently. So they had a top team. And for me to face that at number 6 was a lot easier than my eventual opportunity to open the batting. And that was really a force sort of move because our openers were struggling really badly in that series. So the initial sort of advice and communication to me was that this tour would be a tour for me to play the first class matches, to get accustomed to the standard of play at the highest level, and for me to continue my development and growth as a player. But it so happened that we struggled badly. There were certain things off the field that contributed towards that struggle, and the opportunity just came. Now, looking back, I wouldn't change that for anything, but I'm just saying, when I reflect as a player, I would have loved to play more first-class cricket, mastered my skill, because quite frankly, what was happening to me as a player was I was learning my trade as a batsman at the test level, where the margin for error was so small. So I struggled, but I built resolve, I built character. It pushed me to work harder as a player, and that is what that experience taught me.
Then focusing on, say, the Sean Pollock getting you out 6 times, did you try and make adjustments in between test matches whilst you're actually facing him as well? Or did you try and back your natural game and in the sense, and then just try and, in your mindset, thinking that you'll work on things once a tour is over? Because there's a lot said about test cricket. It kind of scrambles sometimes batsmen's minds. A player's got a wood over someone. How are things when you reflect back on facing Sean Pollock and him having those moments over you as a batsman?
What I can say is, when I reflect, I think at that stage I was backing the approach that brought me success at the levels that I played before, and that is at the under-19 level. That was at the initial first-class level for the handful of matches that I played. So I backed my approach there to bring me success at the test level, and that is what most players do. And it's a lesson that I'm going to share here, and a story that might spark some new way of thinking for current players. So because of that, and because you heard that constantly from your coaches, that listen, you got to back the ability and the approach that got you to this point to bring you success. They don't push you to change too much, because during a tour, it's very difficult for you to reconfigure your game or your mental approach. It's a challenging thing. I'm not saying that it is impossible, but it's very difficult for a young player or any player to remodel his or her game during a tour. You very rarely get the opportunity to do so. So in that instance with Sean Pollock, I was backing my game that I use at the first class level that brought me success. And a lot of that game had to do with, as an opener, being patient, leaving a lot of balls, waiting for the bad balls to put away the bad balls, not overly trying to score off the good balls, but playing that waiting game. But guess what, Neil? When you play that waiting game against a formidable unit like South Africa, where 5 of the bowlers used are top class and world class bowlers, you very rarely get a bad ball. So I was playing a waiting game with no opportunities for run scoring because these guys were so consistent. I can't remember on that tour Sean Pollock bowling me 1 ball down the leg side. That's how consistent this guy was. He ran close to the stumps, and because of that angle that he bowled, the slightest lateral movement made you think as a batsman that the ball was moving a lot more than what it was because of the angle. And he suffocated you as a batsman. And when you think about Jonty Rhodes at backward point, Herschel Gibbs at cover, even if you hit it in the gap, these guys are onto it in quick time. So the moral of the story is this. Even when you play at the first class level, when you play that possible waiting game where you don't have a complement of 5 top quality bowlers that you'll possibly get at the test level, and you don't get the number of bad balls that you'll get in the test level, at the first class level, you get a lot of bad balls. So you can play a waiting game, you can bat for 2 sessions and guarantee you get 100, 150. But I think you got to still push your game at that lower level to be more than that. You got to push your game to score off good deliveries. You got to push your game to even score against the best bowler in that first class side. That is how you shape yourself to become a better batsman at the test level, so that when you get 5 top quality bowlers, you can still score runs and dominate against them. So the lesson was that exactly. If I had to do it again, I'll be training and preparing myself differently for those opportunities that I get against Sean Pollock. I wouldn't play the waiting game. I would be more on the offensive in that situation.
You also made your ODI debut against South Africa. First innings, you batted at number 7. How did you find that adaptation to the shorter form of the game at the highest level? How do you reflect back? Was your game more suited to the longer form or the shortest form?
Well, it was more suited for the longer form. What I can say is I didn't get the chance to play a lot of cricket generally, and first class cricket and list A cricket. And even within the cricket that I played before making my test debut, a little amount was that white ball cricket as well. So I didn't really have many opportunities. So I was virtually playing on the strength of my 4-day game. And I got the opportunity to play because it was a developmental tour for me personally as a young player. So the experience was a great one because I got a chance to see some of our really good West Indian players prepare, perform, give their best. And I learned so much off the field as against on the field in terms of my own personal performances. So I would say I needed to play more cricket. And even when I went beyond that tour and I worked alongside Desmond Haynes, he was very adamant that the guys who are confined to playing red ball cricket should also balance their game with playing white ball cricket, and vice versa. The guys who play white ball cricket should also balance their game with playing red ball cricket, because what it does, it sharpens your skills, not only physical skills as a batsman or as a bowler, it sharpens your mental skills as well, because when you're playing a game of cricket, whether it's in the shortest format or in the longest format, the actual game doesn't change. The mindset needs to be right. And that mindset could be used interchangeably across formats. So you got to try and give yourself latitude in terms of the type of cricket that you play so that you can become a better player for the challenges that you face across formats.
So in domestic cricket, the next couple of years, did your actual training differ then when it came to the shortest form or the longest form? Did you do stuff like range hitting or anything, or was it a case where you just solely concentrated on fundamentals and backed your game then to adapt to all formats?
Well, Neil, I think what we have to do is to kind of contextualize things a bit. T20 cricket started in the mid 2000s, right? Before that, 50 over cricket was the only thing people focus on in terms of white ball cricket. And I made my debut in 1998. So I played 98. I had about 2 or 3 away tours before I played my first tour at home. And again, I highlight the point that it took me a space of 3 or 4 years before I eventually played my first test match in the Caribbean in familiar conditions where I was brought up in. And that first innings that I played there in that first test match is where I scored my first test 100. But the approach to batting, the approach to training was very different to what the approach to batting and training is now. So coaching methodologies have changed, approaches to training as a player, those things have changed. And I was just confined to training in that era where range hitting was a rare thing. You more thought about playing the game in a manner where you built a foundation. Even if you're playing white ball cricket, you make sure you don't lose many wickets and then you have a go at the end. That was the style of play that continued before T20 cricket took the world by storm. And that is where we can find our development as players too. So you'll go to the nets and you'll say, hey, the first 10, 15 minutes of your innings, very crucial. So you will want to do that in the nets. You'd want to make sure that you put a high value on your wicket because that's when you're most vulnerable at the start of your innings. And then as you go through that session that you bat in the nets, you then start to focus on your scoring areas. And if a bowler is doing what would you do? Your dominant areas, you train yourself in terms of developing skill. So you do drills and repetition and all that. And that was the general way of practicing physically. Then on the mental side, with the association of Brian and all these guys who were playing, Brian in particular was a maestro in terms of how he prepared himself mentally for a challenge in Test cricket. I can remember when he scored that 213 against Australia in Sabina Park. He told me exactly what he's going to do. We sat down the night before. He walked through that entire innings and then went out there and did it. Even when he scored 400, walked through that entire innings with me and went there and did that. So I learned a lot from the manner later on in which he prepared himself mentally. And to be fair, for all cricketers, how you prepare mentally will guarantee, I would say, 70 to 80% of the success that you will achieve as a batsman or as a cricketer.
Can you give us a little insight into the type of stuff he was telling you? Was he visualizing? Was it just all visualization as a bowler's coming down?
Yeah, it's visualization. It's visualization. It's also recognizing and assessing yourself as a player, knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses. So when you're coming up against an opposition and say a minimum of 5 bowlers at you, you're generally aware as to what these bowlers are capable of. Some bowlers, they outswing the ball. Some bowlers, they swing the ball in. Some bowlers are very consistent in the lengths that they bowl. So they finish majority of their deliveries at the top of the stump. So they're very challenging to get away in terms of boundaries. So you got to take your singles game out. So, and he does that to the exact details. So for example, the 213 that he scored against Australia, he knew that his biggest threat was Glenn McGrath. And he knew exactly how Glenn McGrath could get him out. Would have been caught in the cordon or would have been LBW with that delivery, nipping back from outside off. So he had a plan to play Glenn McGrath, which was to score a single and bat him from the non-striker's end. And then he knew exactly the bowlers that he would go after. He was very comfortable using his feet to Shane Warne. So he would attack Shane Warne and he would attack Gillespie and these guys. And he knew exactly how he was going to do that. So there is an ebb and flow to an innings as a batsman. And there's a tempo. You very rarely could sustain the same tempo in an innings even if you're playing T20 cricket. That's the appreciation as well, because there are some bowlers who will challenge you more, other bowlers who you could really hit out of the attack. And those are the things you've got to decipher and be clear in your mind before. Now, I'm saying that from a planning point of view. The other great asset you need to have as a batsman is not overthink that while the game is going on. You got to find yourself in a zone where you're conscious of it, but you're not thinking hard out about the planning that you put in. You're allowing yourself to unfold. A lot of players call that the zone, where you've done your physical preparation, you've done your mental work and your visualization, and now your focus is being in the present, seeing the here and now, watching the bowler, whilst already sort of programming yourself with an approach. And that to me is the ideal equilibrium you want to have as a player to give yourself the best chance of performing. And Brian did that more often than not. And I'm sure many of the top players in the world, that is what they do to get consistent performances.
And that standout series for yourself, 2003 against Australia, you did touch on it. Were you firmly in the zone then? Talk us through those 2 centuries you got.
A couple things accounted for that type of success. One, it was my first series in the Caribbean in familiar conditions after playing 16 test matches, all in foreign conditions, where it was hard for me to adjust, and 16 test matches in a period where I was still learning my game as a player. So just prior to that 2003 series, if you look at the first class season in the Caribbean, I think I would have scored the most runs in that season. So I had a chance of having a truckload of runs under my belt before I walked into this first test match against Australia and Guyana. So it's always good for you to have game time as a player. And that is what was significant about my success that I achieved in that tour. It was against Australia. And if you talk to any player across the globe and you ask them which team you would want to perform against, they'll always say the #1 ranked team in the world. And Australia at that time with Steve Waugh was the #1 ranked team in the world. And they were like on a rampage, beating every single opposition. So to get my first Test 100 against Australia in the Caribbean was, to me, another moment where it opened the expectation further for me as a player at the Test level. And I embraced the confidence, and I used that to carry me through that entire series.
If any youngster came to you and said, how did you personally construct your innings? Did you look to count your scores? Any other mental things you were doing out there?
I would say very similar to what I mentioned in terms of the mental preparation required to play, and that instance that I shared with Brian Lara and how he went about preparing himself for that innings against Australia in 1999 when he scored 213 is a similar sort of pattern, and that is what happens when you hear commentators, you hear coaches talk about it's great for a young player to rub shoulders with a senior player, or it's great to see those young Indian players in the IPL getting a chance to be up close and personal with all the best players in the world. It's moments like what I discussed with myself and Brian that all these young players share and enjoy, and which contribute significantly towards their development. The chance to hear from Ricky Ponting what he does when he's going through a rut, the chance, to be able to talk to let me just say, a Shane Bond when he's in a KKR setup. Those things are, that's like gold dust. Few young players in the world, they have the opportunity to do so. And in my time, I had a limited amount of interaction growing up that shaped my approach. So in my instance, what I would say to youngsters is, for that innings that I played, I patterned it on the advice that I got from Brian Lara in terms of which bowlers I attacked. I attacked Stuart McGill because I knew he is the guy that I have to score most of my runs from. I knew that Brett Lee will be aggressive to me, so I was not going to take him on and play the pull shot. I waited for him to pitch the ball up, because what he generally did was go short, short, bang, bang, go for the Yorker straight, and then he will pitch up a half volley wide, looking for someone to sneak and go down and slip. So you sort of knew what these guys were going to throw at you, and you had an approach that you think you were comfortable playing and countering it. And that was what I did against Australia, and that is how I generally shaped a lot of the innings that I played against international teams.
And you've got to mention that 100 against Australia at your home ground. How high does that rank in a moment in your life as well as your career?
Well, it was really, I would say, second to scoring your debut century in Test match cricket. It happened so quickly. It was in the space of a week. I had scored that first 100 against Australia and Ghana, and then I came my first innings at the Oval in my home ground, in front of my family, in a jam-packed Queen's Park Oval. I mean, it was like a dream come true. I was still very young, early 20s. And yeah, I thought I was on top of my game as a player. I was working really hard in terms of my physical fitness, my strength, all aspects of my game. And I was now beginning to taste success and real success. And success that I always dreamed of at the international level. Remember, I mentioned to you, I would have played 16 Test matches in foreign conditions. And again, it reinforces the point that I wish that it was not 16 Test matches in foreign conditions that I played. I wish that it was probably about 3 or 4 before I got the chance to play at home. Because when I look back in my career, I averaged mid-30s as an opening batsman for the West Indies, playing in the Caribbean, as against, playing outside. And that to me is something, if I had that early sort of confidence and grooming, it would have shaped a lot of what I did beyond that in a different manner, right? So yeah, you could only look in hindsight, but I feel playing in the Caribbean, scoring that second 100, really started to now demand me scoring heavily every time that I batted. Not that I didn't demand that before, but now everybody wanted to see you score 100 every time you batted in a test match.
And how do you reflect on the couple of years after that you went again away to South Africa, troubles against Makai Rantini? He got you out, was it 4 times in that series?
Yep.
Again, how do you reflect?
Well, I went through a period where there were some off-the-field issues, and there were still some issues around our cricket that started to get into the way. You were never sure if you would be a starter. You started to put a lot of your energies on if you're going to get a chance to play. So your whole dedicated focus was not on playing. You were working hard and expending a lot of energy and resources to get the opportunity to play. And sometimes when you get there, you're now burnt out because you're putting yourself under pressure as a player to perform, because you're thinking about someone else taking that chance, or persons not wanting to see you do well, or if you don't do well today, there's a chance that you wouldn't get an opportunity tomorrow. So all these things now started to gain a greater priority in my mind. And I started to get those challenges, which made it difficult for me to comprehend. The support around me too wasn't as strong as it should have been. We had different captains at times. We had contractual issues with the board, sponsor issues. So all these sort of undertones outside of the cricket started to take up a greater part of your mind as a player. I'm not saying that that's an excuse, but all I'm saying is it wasn't a smooth environment. And again, I went back to South Africa. I think I got a half century in that test series, 1/2 century at the Wanderers. And it was a very good South African team. So it was tough again for us to get success as a team. And when you're in a team environment that is not winning, your own personal game becomes a little more burdensome. because you're fighting hard, you're not in that relaxed mode, you're not exactly where you want to be mentally, emotionally, physically. And that is where I think I could have done better, reflecting on that period in time.
And then the 95, you're a bit in and out of the side, you were saying, just, and then that 95 against New Zealand, following up again against, I guess, your highest test score against India, 100. Did you feel that you just kind of, that things started to click again mentally and on the playing side as well during that period?
Yeah, well, I mean, after South Africa, I was left out again. So there was a little period, a couple of years, where I wasn't in the mix of things. Although I was scoring a lot of runs at the domestic level, I again struggled to command the place playing at home. And I found myself being a part of a touring party in foreign conditions. I think I played my most number of test matches against a team like South Africa in South Africa. And that's not easy. So I felt that year, 2006, was one of my best years as an international player because, again, I had a solid first-class season. I won the Sir Vivian Richards Award, scoring the most runs. And having the chance to play and walk straight into a series, again, helped me because in the years before that, I was only now confined to being selected in test match cricket. And I was struggling to get game time before I walked into a series. And you will ask any player, it's so difficult for you to find your groove and your mojo when you haven't played a cricket match for 4 to 6 months and you find yourself opening the batting in a test match. So I found myself in that situation on a number of occasions. And I just struggled. What I was trying to do was trying to buy myself time, get myself in form while playing a test match, which is difficult. But in that 2006 series, I had the chance of going straight from a first-class season where I scored about 3 centuries. Boom, I walked into India series and, had a very good series. I think I scored the most test runs in that series against India, where we lost only the last test match. So we drew the first 3 and we lost the last one, narrow margin. And then I walked straight into a series against New Zealand. And I got 90 odd in that first test. And that was against a really formidable Stephen Fleming side with Bond and all these guys. So we should have won that first test match. If you look at that test match, we had to chase 240 or 250. Myself and Gail, we put on about 170. And we were bowled out and lost the test match by 20 runs. So again, I felt that 2006 would have been, a step forward for me and for me to move now from maybe just being a player to probably taking a little more leadership in that West Indian side. And my heart was broken because after doing so well in 2006, they picked a group of 30 players for the 2007 World Cup, and I was not even included. So here it is, I've scored the most test runs for the West Indies. I've had a tremendous year, and you pick 30 guys to train and prepare for the World Cup when there's no cricket in the Caribbean, and I'm not even in a squad of 30 guys and 30 of the best players in the region. And I was so crestfallen that I went back to training, but I had to train on my own. There was no cricket happening. The entire Caribbean was preparing for the 2007 World Cup early in the year. And I found myself as a spectator watching the opening game of the World Cup in the stands, watching West Indies play. And Lara was waving to me from the pavilion, inviting me to come to the players' enclosure. And I was there with my family. And it was more my own personal way of saying, Daren, you should be here too. And I went through that phase. And for the first half of that year, we had no cricket, no competitive cricket. And then they appointed me vice captain of the test team to tour England in 2007, alongside Ramnari Sawan, who was the captain. So here it is. I've just scored the most runs in 2006. And for 4 to 5 months, I've had nothing with regard to West Indies cricket as a player in a net, nothing. I was doing all these things on my own. And then I'm appointed vice captain of West Indies team to England. And I said to myself, I only hope and pray we've got about 2 or 3 county matches before we play the first test match at Lord's. Guess what? We had a 1 first-class game against Somerset. And after the first day, it was rained out. So that is where I feel as a player in those times, you struggled if you didn't have a chance to play cricket. Now there are so many third-party competitions, so many opportunities across the globe where you can go and you can play even if you're not in your national setup. You see it with Pujara, who's confined to test match cricket. He can go to England and play. India arranges an India Red versus an India Blue, and there are first-class matches for guys like Pujara to continue to keep their competitive edge so that when they walk into a test match, they can deliver. But I never had that as a West Indian. And that to me significantly accounted for my sort of downfall and my inconsistency at the test level when given the opportunity at the back end of my career.
When you didn't make that squad for the World Cup, did you have any communications with the selectors? Did they explain their decision to you?
Well, nobody explained it. I was so embarrassed. I mean, I couldn't find the willpower to pick the phone up and even ask Brian Lara or ask the chairman of selectors. I think at that time, possibly it was Sir Vivian Richards. And I just felt that, you know, this was, I mean, I'm not saying that I should have been in the squad for the World Cup. By no means I'm saying that. I'm saying that you got to look at your cricket from a bird's eye view, especially when you're making decisions like that. And selectors, they have a greater role to play with players and their success at the highest level. And especially now where you have specialist players, you got to think about players and the amount of time they have playing before going into a series. And you got to make decisions sometime that is in the best interest of everyone and not necessarily in the best interest of a particular tour. So I used to beg Bennett King, when he was the coach of the West Indies team, please bring me on tour a month earlier. I don't need to be paid. I want to be on tour so that I can get some proper net. And if there are any practice games, if you can insert me, insert me. I don't mind having the chance to play. So I can sharpen myself for test match cricket. And I continuously now, in my role as a broadcaster, I have the latitude now to speak to a Roger Harper, a Jimmy Adams, and I constantly share my story so that guys who are confined to test match cricket, they are looked at from a broad perspective and they're not compromised in terms of them giving their best when they have big gaps between tours.
Now you mentioned you made the vice captain of the test side. Your last test match for West Indies was a year later, 2008. Did that, when you reflect back, did that World Cup moment, did you fall out of love of the game? And I know you mentioned, you know, the lack of playing and that might have contributed to your inconsistency, but from a mental side as well, did part of you just feel that love drain away slightly, having missed out on a home World Cup?
Well, I would say I felt let down. I didn't think that I lost the love and passion for the game. It was always there. I felt that when I was moving forward with my career from a performance point of view and now returning the investment that West Indies cricket had made in me as a player, it should have been further supported from just that logistical standpoint. I'm not saying by no means that I wanted to be selected. I'm just saying logistically, there is a commitment that should be made for players to give them the best chance of performing. And that was not made. And we're in the business of producing quality cricketers and performing as a test playing nation. And that should be a priority when you think about it from the point of view of the governing body for the game in this part of the region. And there shouldn't be loopholes along the player development pathway and this process that puts players in a worse off situation. So to answer your question again and to reiterate that, no, I didn't lose the love for the game. What I felt is I felt that I had to now again prove myself that I belong and I deserve this opportunity to be here. And that only could have come with performances, but yet I was being compromised in me preparing myself to give my best because those things were outside of my control. I couldn't go down in Trinidad and just off the street pick up 4 quality bowlers that were able to bowl me for 3 hours a day. As much as I was willing to do that, I had no access to those things. And that is, majority of the times, that's the reality for a lot of cricketers across the globe. You don't have access to good quality bowling, or maybe bowling machines or facilities that would allow you to train with the intensity that you're required to train at to get better. So that is something that governing bodies and persons who are in positions of power, they need to take that into consideration and put those things right if they want to get better performances from, you know, the body of players that they have.
And in the back end of your career, because you retired in 2011, you mentioned your last test match was in 2008. During that period, did you still have the drive to try and get back into the test side? And was there also then a moment where you realized that your time had passed at the international stage? And how did you feel when that realization hit?
Well, I remember playing that 2008 series. We won that first test match against South Africa, which was a big step for West Indies cricket. I think John Dyson was our coach on that tour, and Chris Gayle was the captain. I remember top scoring in the second innings, and I said, yes, now we should push to try and win this series. And that didn't happen. Chris Gayle got injured. We played with 10 men. And then the last test match, we got routed. I think it was a 3.5 day test match. So it really finished on a sour note when it started on such a good note. And that was the sad thing. So I went away from that series and I said to myself, listen, you know, there is an opportunity here for me to play a home series, because again, that was a rarity for me. I went back into first class cricket, and in 2011, I scored about 700 runs in that season. And there was a bit of hope for me getting a chance to play in that home series. When I was not selected, I said to myself, you know, if you perform like you did and you don't get the nod from the selectors, I don't think that I should focus on pushing myself to play for the West Indies. I think there's a great chance for me to help develop Trinidad and Tobago's cricket, because I've gone through a process with a lot of young players where we have been able to achieve an immeasurable amount of success, even at the T20 level. And that's with the Champions League, and the likes of Pollard and Bravo and the Ryans and these guys came through me as captain. And here it was, I was seeing these guys maturing now and dominating the landscape. So I said to myself, now is a chance for me to focus on maybe taking another group of players and aiding in their development, making sure that their team ethos are set right, that they have the right work ethic, and get the chance to create the right environment for them to blossom and maybe have another era of young Trinidad and Tobago cricketers who can blossom. And I started with that intention. I did write to the president of the board and give him I think a 16-point plan of what I think are necessary items to address to take our cricket to an even higher level. So he received that, not sure he acted on it. And then I saw arrangements around the teams, certain things just, you know, being left to disintegrate. And having studied law, professionalized and certified myself for life beyond cricket, I felt in that year, 2013, I think it was, in that year, I felt, you know, it was time for me to retire and, you know, move on in my life.
Did you have a plan in place, the way you wanted to go, the direction? So now you're in the media, but initially when you gave up the game, or what path did you initially take?
I would say broadcasting wasn't something that was uppermost in my mind. Along the way of playing international cricket and playing T20 cricket, I had numerous opportunities to be mic'd up as captain, and to speak with the commentators whilst manage my responsibility on the field. I also did countless number of interviews whilst playing, and then was invited on many occasions to join the commentators in the comm box. And on that, I was invited a few times while I was still actively playing to be part of tournaments to commentate. And I can tell you it was a horrible experience to me. I never in my wildest dream thought that I would transition into doing broadcasting and commentary. I felt it was very dormant and very docile and not something that I would like. But what I can say is the experiences that I've had looking at the game from outside, as those things have really made me appreciate the value of this great game even more. It has also allowed me to contribute positively towards the development of players across the board, because I'm one person who is always willing to share information from where I sit now as a broadcaster. So I'm always on the ground, giving empirical data to players, sharing some of the trends that I see in certain formats of the game. And whether they use it to their advantage is up to them. I'm not forcing anybody to use it, but I think I have a responsibility as a former player to share information. If you have more information, sometimes the decision being made is a better decision. So that's how I view it. I continue to enjoy this great game. I play still. Myself and Brian Lara, we play a game in my community in Barco every year. Because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to do it. We've done it the last 4 years. I play for the West Indies Legends team. Recently, there's a tournament there, but sometimes it conflicts with my responsibilities that I have. But I still enjoy this great game. And I think, yeah, there's still a lot that I can do to contribute towards making it a better game.
In terms of, if we focus on the media side briefly, is there any one innovation that you feel that could aid the development, aid the learning of the viewer back home watching on TV that you like, or you envisage being brought into our TV screens moving forward in the years ahead?
Yeah, I mean, from a entertainment point of view, I think what we can have happening is more insights into teams when they're off the field. So like mid-innings break, a camera in the dressing room when the coach is talking about what is necessary. Now I know that coaches are very reluctant to share sort of information that they consider sacred to a team that might be able to give the opposition a sort of advantage and an awareness as to what the strategy is. But I feel from a viewer's point of view, listening at a break to what a coach or a player is telling players, or how the two players who are batting are conversing and sharing information, or listening to bowlers talking, or maybe having cameras on a batsman's helmet and some way of a batsman, maybe at a particular point in time, saying something that the viewer could hear. I think, obviously, with the permission of the player, I think that is very insightful and would add value to the broadcast, because we all want to know what is going through a player's mind at a crucial and critical moment in a game. If we can get it real time, wow, that's great television. That's like reality TV. So that is one thing that I think we can probably do. I'm all for technology. I'm all for technology and introducing that in the game. So the auto no ball, I support that fully. The review system, I think that's important, because in our era, if we had the review system, I can tell you I would have scored a lot more runs, because you had numerous times persons being given out and the ball was sliding down the leg side or hitting outside off. So that's better for the game of cricket and for making sure that the better team takes the advantage and wins. But apart from that, I think we shouldn't innovate too much. I don't think that we need to break this game down into too many different formats. I mean, I've looked at T10 cricket and I still think that it's not really allowing for all the players to show their true skill. It's too one-dimensional and in favor of batsmen, and I don't think that there is a real contest between bat and ball there. So that's just my personal view, but I think the game is heading in the right direction. What I'd like to see is I'd like to see more test players transition and go across formats rather than T20 cricketers go across formats from their end. I want to see that synergy happening across the board. So a test player playing T20 cricket, I want to see a T20 cricketer playing test cricket. I don't like specialization. If you're a cricketer, you should be able to play all formats.
And then just to end on, how do you view the game currently in the Caribbean? The spectator buy-in? Is there still love for the game, in your opinion? And
yeah,
the state of the test and the one-day T20 teams, strengths and weaknesses, and how do you see the development in the years ahead?
Well, what I can say is the passion, the following in the Caribbean is very vibrant. Yeah, West Indian spectators in the Caribbean and in the West Indian diaspora across the globe, they're still very passionate about West Indies cricket. What they're currently experiencing right now is they've become a little bit despondent and a little bit jaded with the fact that we've lost more than we've won matches. And that's human. And you can understand that. But I think what you got to give credit to is the fact that the current dispensation in Cricket West Indies is very much cricket centric. And they have a cricket first philosophy, which focuses majority of its resources, Cricket West Indies resources, into the cricket itself, which is so crucial. So minimum standards for players' fitness is taking front of the stage. There's a deeper focus on coaching certification programs and ensuring that the coaching stock in the Caribbean is being upgraded and uplifted. You have better player-board relationship happening, which is vital in today's landscape, where there needs to be a meeting of the minds, especially with players who have the incentive of playing in third-party competitions where they can be paid a lot more than what the national setup here could afford. So you need to have that relationship working in your advantage. We will continue to see young players develop, but I think there's need to be a little more creative in this pandemic sort of era where we continue to develop young players. We continue to drive the mindset that will make them consistently successful. I also think that we need to select the right persons in positions to help guide and develop players. I think we could improve drastically with that. But apart from that, I think you have a sense of optimism that things are moving forward and progressing. With regard to our test T20 and 50 over teams, the test team is moving northwards, which is good. That series win against Bangladesh would have sort of brought life into test cricket in the Caribbean. I believe that having a wider pool of players to play in that format and across format, the competitiveness is healthy for any test playing nation. So there shouldn't be a case where senior players can sit on their laurels and be able to just turn up and play when available. So good that young players are coming through and competing for spots. With regard to our white ball cricket and even red ball cricket, I love to see more spinners coming through the Caribbean and wrist spinners, particularly because I think they have an integral part to play across formats, and we need to nurture, cultivate, and encourage the development of wrist spinners, whether it be innovative and give an additional point to first-class teams for getting wickets with wrist spinners, but there needs to be a direct and concerted effort towards grooming that type of skill in the Caribbean. We've been blessed with great fast bowlers. You look at the young fast bowling stock we have a vast number of under 25 young fast bowlers who have already tasted international cricket. And I think we will be in a good place when it comes to our fast bowling. We have a few young batsmen, but I would like to see the next group of batsmen being developed in a different manner outside of international cricket, where when the opportunity presents itself, they're able to do so after playing 60, 70 first-class matches, 60, 70 list A matches, and not necessarily learning their trade at the international level. So on those fronts, I think it's great. Continue to use our strengths as a six-hitting nation, as a boundary-hitting nation, but also balance that with our ability and technical skills to rotate the strike and to manipulate the ball. So those are things that will continue to challenge us as a cricketing nation, but I'm a proud West Indian.
Daren, perfect. Thank you very much for your time. Amazing talking through your career. Fantastic insight into the world of cricket from your eyes, and just amazing to chat. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
So Neel Khagram, Cricket Life Stories, Daren Ganga. Thank you.